Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Another entry for you here, this one again based on one of your suggestions. I have actually read the book that this suggestion is based on in the past. I remember reading it back when I was in college. The university there had a huge, absolutely gigantic library, and I loved visiting that library and coming across and then just reading book after book. And one of my days there, I was able to come across this book here, which even to this day, I mean, it is a great book. It scared the crap out of me whenever I was first reading it. And so looking at some of the information, it was fascinating to see that pretty much it seemed like I mean it's amazing that it hasn't caught on as much as it should when it comes to the tales of, let's say, ghost encounters or anything involving apparitions. Some people know about it, others don't, but apparently it seems to have inspired another movie called Poltergeist. Although I don't know, someone let me know if this is true or not, but that's what I read. But what I'm talking about is the incident known as the Black Hope Horror, which I'll try to provide as much information as I can. Not really too much available because this incident has only happened once and it hasn't happened since, but again, I'll try to relate as much as I can. So this occurred sometime in the early 1980s, and you have to go to a place in Texas called Crosby, Texas, and you have to go specifically to another place there called the Newport Subdivision. I've actually included a picture of that location there. Apparently the street that it's called is Poppets Way. So not much of a street. I mean, basically from one end to another end, you're probably looking at a mile, 2 miles at most. So somewhere in this subdivision, this is where it occurred. And so this is what happened back in the early 80s. There was a couple by the name of Sam and Judith Haney that were purchasing a home there. This was a area that at that time was still being developed very early on, so it was nowhere near like it is today where you see a bunch of homes. Rather, this was a location that was out in the open. It had homes being built very, very early on. And when they were doing so and they purchased a home, one of the earliest things that the husband did, Sam, was he wanted to create a swimming pool in his backyard, which is his right to do. Obviously, being in the state of Texas, it's always hot here for most of the year, so having a swimming pool will be definitely a good idea to relax in the evenings. When he was doing so, though, he had a strange encounter. There was an elderly black man who one day visited him. He showed up at his door just out of the blue, and when he did so, he let them know that as far as actually digging the hole and just doing anything as far as swimming pool would not be a good idea. And the reason for it is the minute they did so, they would come across human remains. They were shocked to find this. It turns out that the black man's name was Jasper Norton, and the reason why he knew this was because he himself dug those graves and buried those people there long before. Some of them were his family members, some of them were people he knew. He apparently lived in that subdivision for a long, long time. And even then, his history was preset by others that had lived there before him. And it was a long time that people had lived in that area, so much so that it went back to the slave days. And the way he described it was that area, it was called Black Hope because eventually a cemetery, like an unauthorized cemetery of sorts, was built in that area specifically for the slaves. So as they would live and then as they would die, once they died, they would be buried in that cemetery. And you're looking at a picture of it here. So again, this was a guy, Mr. Norton, that did a lot of the burials himself, and he was just letting them know about this and giving them a heads up with regards to that. Well, before the Haneys ever moved in, sometime between then, the owner of that whole subdivision decided, you know what, I'm going to make some money, so I'm going to sell the entire subdivision to developers, knowing, of course, that still that was Black Hope Cemetery that was there. But the developers didn't care, the owner didn't seem to care as well, and so the Black Hope Cemetery was cleared, but the bodies, the graves, were still left as is. It's just the top part with all the tombstones they were removed altogether. The guy that let them know ahead of time, Jasper Norton, he knew about this. I believe he kind of protested. If I can remember, he tried to like have something stopped, but nothing could be done. The land was sold. The developers came in. They built the homes, and then that's where you get to the current history in the 1980s of the Haneys moving in. Obviously, they were now horrified to find out that basically they were living on top of a cemetery. They tried to work with some of the law enforcement there to see what could go on. In fact, they brought in some of the sheriffs, they brought in the coroner. They were able to dig up some two bodies exactly where that the guy told them that they were digging, that they were going to find bodies, and sure enough, they found two skeletons. They were so brittle, so decayed over having so many years of being buried there. You're looking at the pictures of them now, that when that happened, it was difficult to move any of the bones because they would just basically turn to powder. It turns out, after a little bit of investigating, that the bodies that were there, right in that spot, belonged to a Betty and Charlie Thomas, who died sometime in the 1930s. This was kind of like property that was theirs, but again, it was set aside specifically for the Black Hope Cemetery. It seems like they designated it as the Black Hope because, again, being during the time of slaves, it was kind of like their last hope to have some kind of freedom in death. But in other words, they found all this information, and then that's when spooky things started to happen. It seemed like the minute that the bodies truly were dug up, and this is again after this guy, Jasper Norton, told them not to do anything as far as those bodies, that they wouldn't want to touch anything or dig anything up, then that's when strange things started to happen. One night, for example, Mrs. Haney, she suddenly saw that her clock, I guess it was either an alarm clock or a regular clock, started to glow and spark. They had a sliding door either in the front or the back of the house, and it suddenly would open and close on its own as if somebody were either entering or leaving the place, but of course nobody was there doing that. She found her shoes on multiple occasions. It would vanish, like her shoes were no longer be where they should be, either in the bedroom closet or anywhere else she normally kept them. And when she would look around, she would eerily find the shoes placed on top of the area where the bodies were found, where the bodies of Betty and Charlie, the Thomas, the people that were buried back in the 1930s, where they were found as well. Mr. Haney also discovered several strange things going on. He would see random shadows. He, at one time, encountered, for example, if I remember correctly, he had come home and he saw like a black apparition, strange, creepy looking thing, whatever it was floating on top of Mrs. Haney as she was sleeping, kind of like almost like inspecting her. Apparently some of the other neighbors too, whenever this was happening to the Haneys, some stuff started happening to them as well. Some of the neighbors reported, for example, lights and televisions and water faucets turning on and off. One of the most creepiest things was somebody reported that whenever they had like their restroom there, it would turn on by itself, like the toilet would flush on its own. And when that would happen, they could hear like a conversation coming as the water was churning, which is really creepy when you think about it, because the conversation nothing would be happening. It would be eerily silent while the toilet was silent. But when it would turn on its own and it would flush on its own, then that's when they would hear like what they would sound like conversation. The way they described it is, you could hear people murmuring to themselves as if it was a ghost or a spirit of some sort, purposely trying to let them know that they were there. Other people reported that in the dead heat of Texas, again being so hot, whenever that would they would come across certain portions of their homes, they would find like ice cold pockets of air, so cold that obviously it was something letting them know 100%. Finally, there was more like physical things that were happening. One of the neighbors reported that people by the name of Ben and Jen Williams, that near the area where they usually had their flower beds, sinkholes started to appear. And not only that, but the sinkholes would take the shape of a coffin. That let them know that wherever this Black Hole Cemetery was, it not only was in the land and the area that the Haney's had, but it was pretty much all around the entire subdivision because these graves, these burials, they would stretch throughout the entire area, which gives you a note of how big this Black Oak Cemetery was and how insidious the action was of the owners, because basically they just again said, no, we don't care about the cemetery. Let's just blaze everything off and then build everything on top of it, build a whole new subdivision, and then that way we can make some money. But of course they did not realize that stuff like this would end up happening with these people that lived there afterward. I guess one of the culminations, if I remember correctly from the book, was there was like almost an attack of some sort. I can't remember if it was the Haneys or if it was some of the other neighbors, but they saw like these two ghostly figures in their home, and they seemed to be, I think, like almost like a black mass of some sort. And they, the way he described it was like pure evil. Like it was something where it was just horrific. Like you did not want these things around you. And either they charged at him or he charged at them. I can't remember, but something happened where there was almost like an attack of some sort, and these things went through him. And then that's when it was like a shocking cold of some sort. It was crazy stuff when I was reading this. On a tragic bit of news, and this is, you can take it with a grain of salt, because one has to think if it was truly involving the ghosts and the spirits themselves, or if it was something else just more health oriented. But some of the people there, especially the Haneys, their daughters, they would come by and they started to encounter some bad things, like their health would deteriorate. Everyone apparently that came by their area would start to develop like bad healths, like stuff that they would normally not be diagnosed with. All of a sudden, there was enough for them to, encounter, like, have a huge, absolute gigantic change. In fact, one encounter was somebody, I'm trying to remember who it was, but they had a daughter named Tina, and when she came across the home, they went there and they started, I guess they had enough. They wanted to find proof that there really was graves. And the reason for this was because all of them, like everyone that was being affected by this, was planning to sue the developers. And the only way that they could win was if they could truly have proof. Like, let's say, photographic proof of mass graves, mass bodies, anything along those lines. And despite warnings that they shouldn't do anything else as far as touching these bodies and as far as uncovering them, because especially with what happened just with the uncovering of the original bodies of Betty and Charlie Thomas, one of them neighbors continued to do this, and they came across a body, like a coffin of some sort, but they had to stop halfway because they were either getting too tired or they were getting too sick. And so the daughter, named Tina, she took over. And when that happened, that's when all of a sudden she began suffering like a severe sickness of some sort. They brought her onto the couch. Things got really, really worse. And then all of a sudden she suffered a heart attack. And that was it. She was dead. She was pronounced dead at only 30 years old. And the reasons for her heart attack are still unknown. Like, there was no clear diagnosis of what had occurred, because apparently with her condition, with her health, she should not have had something like this. But when the minute she started to have something as far as digging these bodies up or trying to find them, that's when she had this horrible event occur. And so that was probably the most tragic thing that happened within everything involving the Black Hope horror. To sum everything up, eventually the Haneys took the developers to court, and in a brief bit of good news, they won. They won a settlement of $142,000, but in bad news, immediately there was appealed, and upon appeal, it was found that it was not correct, and so the $142,000 settlement was taken away. And on top of that, they were found to have to pay $50,000 in court costs to, in this case, the defendants, because of what happened. So quite a bit of bad news for everyone all around. All the anguish, everything that they suffered, especially with the attacks on these ghosts and spirits, people losing family members, and then this, winning the case, and then finally thinking that everything is okay, and then losing it on an appeal process. because the developers were ultimately found on the appeal not liable for it. And then on top of that, the final salt in the wound where they had to pay $50,000 in court costs, it just adds up to a whole sort of bad news. Ultimately, the Haneys just quit. Like, they just left the area. They left the homes as is. Other of the neighbors left as well. They just got up and left. I don't know what happened to their mortgages or anything else that they owed. Presumably it was all either considered like bankruptcy or something along those lines where stuff would be wiped out, but at the financial costs of the Haneys. They ended up moving somewhere to Montana, but apparently they ended up moving back to Texas, just somewhere else altogether. Now here's the most interesting part. After all of this, a lot of other neighbors have moved in, and again, I'll show a picture of the place as it looks today, and you'll see that there's homes. I mean, there's still homes that are being sold, bought, and so forth there today, just like any other subdivision, but nobody else has reported anything strange. To this day, there has not been any other encounters, no other tales, nothing else that people have said matches anything as far as the Black Hope Harbor. For all intents and purposes, it's just a regular neighborhood, as is any other neighborhood. So that's what makes it so strange, ultimately, this tale, because why would it happen to just a select group of people? And then on top of that, all this horror, everything that occurred, why would it not happen again? You know, it makes you scratch your head. It makes you wonder. But that's the end of it. That's everything tied to the Black Hope Horror. Highly recommend it. If you have a chance, get the book. I'm sure it's available on Amazon. It's probably available at your local library, too. It's a really good book. Prepare yourself, though, because some of the stuff there is pretty scary. So if you want a good fright, read the book, and be sure to do it at night, so that way you'll have its maximum effect. But otherwise, ultimately, it's a tragic tale of sorts, considering everything that happened to the families and the people that lived through this. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again, as always. Take care.